Hey everybody, I'm Shinobi from Bitcoin Magazine, and I'm sitting down here with Ryan Gentry, the head of business development at Lightning Labs.
Hi, everybody.
So, Rusty kind of just dropped an atom bomb in the room this week with his whole Bitcoin script restoration project. What are your thoughts on that, and just kind of in general the different talks people have given and proposals floating around?
Yeah, it's so interesting. I've been, following generally like the covenants discussion really closely for years, and thought I was up to speed on all the possibilities, right? I had kind of marked down like there were 7 proposals currently in flight. I was excited to come to this event because kind of all 7 were going to be discussed. The proposers were all here in person. And I was really optimistic that this would be a really good event for starting to form consensus around what we want to do. And then, yeah, as you mentioned, the very first talk on Wednesday was Rusty Russell dropping a totally new proposal with the Great Script Restoration Project, which, yeah, certainly threw a kink into how I expected this week to go, but I think in a very positive way. I think throughout the presentations, whether it was about opcat directly from Rijndael from Taproot Wizards, whether it was about CCV from Johan Halseth, who's former Lightning Labs. I was really excited to see what he's been working on. His presentation featured cat really heavily. Pretty much all of the presentations this week featured cat as a core component of what they wanted to do to implement covenants on Bitcoin, which I was surprised by. I guess in hindsight it shouldn't have been, because people have been saying how useful cat is for a while, but I guess I just hadn't really seen it in scripts, and specifically Rijndael's presentation of like why is cat useful for getting information out of signatures was something I wasn't aware of, and I thought that was really good at kind of building intuition for like why is this a useful opcode. So yeah, it's interesting, and why I started off there is kind of the great script restoration is kind of talking about should we restore opcodes like opcat that were disabled in, I think, like what, Bitcoin version 0.4 or something, early on by Satoshi?
Like 2010.
Yeah, like early on. And so that was kind of Rusty's core idea with the script restoration is like, if we restore cat, can we look at the other things that we should restore and just generally make Bitcoin scripts more holistically easy and friendly to work with, rather than kind of like this restricted set that we have now that everybody complains about. And so, yeah, I thought it's a super interesting idea, and does generally seem to have struck a chord with most of the developers here.
Mm-hmm. So what are your thoughts in terms of like the actual feasibility of this? Like, do you really think this is something that we can get everybody behind, at least in the developer circle, and like start moving forward, or is this something that's going to just kind of peter out and we'll wind up back in the same place?
Well, so if this is another stab at the general idea of how do we enable more trustless off-chain protocols in Bitcoin, like we've had kind of isolated instances with, like drive chain just kind of like, just make this one little tweak and enable my preferred thing, right? Sighash any out, and like Christian gave a great presentation yesterday, kind of like from the old battle-scarred veteran of like, don't do what I did, which was if we can just make this one tiny tweak, we can enable channel factories, right? CTV was, a little bit broader, but similarly was kind of like, if we just make this one tiny tweak, we can enable new functionality. And instead, and I think kind of a lot of these various proposals are not script restoration or similar, where they're like, if we just make this one tiny change, we can get new functionality. This is kind of more holistically looking at, why don't we improve script as a whole, right? As a language and as a toolkit for developers, and as an output of that broader project to improve script, we can enable a lot of different things. And not have to necessarily pick favorites. So from the one standpoint, I do think that is a more broadly palatable idea, which is exciting. It's not necessarily like, and this is probably naive, but like hopefully that lessens kind of the politics of it a little bit, of like picking do we have to pick whose favorite proposal we think is best? And it's kind of like, let's just do something that's broadly useful across Bitcoin and enables a lot of things. I think the downside is that, it has a really big surface area. There's a lot going on and a lot of things to bike shed, and a lot of ways that, developers could get bogged down in the implementation and kind of arguing over trivialities, rather than a really small type proposal. It's like either we do it or we don't. So I will say that I think one of the big bonuses is like earlier this morning we saw Rijndael code, Brandon Black, tweet out kind of his understanding of what the scope of the great script restoration would be, and like asked Rusty for feedback, and Rusty was basically like, yep, no, that's it. And so Brandon had been prior to this week, and he admitted in his talk kind of like anti-cat, and promoting enhance, which is CTV and check signature stack and internal key instead, and I think he generally is on board with script restoration instead. We heard Salvatore just now in his talk mention that there's a lot of different ways to accomplish his vision of kind of Merkleize all the things, where the CCV opcode is kind of one way, but he even said in his talk the great script restoration would certainly be sufficient for it. So I think that's been a really good sign here, where one thing I was hoping to see was, again, out of these kind of 7 proposals, could we kind of whittle it down to a couple? And so people not necessarily giving up on their proposals, but saying oh, we can accomplish the goals I want to within this single proposal, I think that is the definition of forming consensus around an idea, which is good.
The way I'm kind of looking at it is OpCat, as much as I have been very critical and skeptical about it, is just at this point undeniably the thing that is continuing to move forward, gaining consensus. And the reality is, if we wind up activating OpCat, it indirectly enables all of these things, most of the functionality of script restoration anyway, except just in a horribly inefficient, kludgy, easy to shoot yourself in the foot way. And if we get to the point where CAT is going to happen, why not enable all the things that it does in a clean, efficient way, rather than just give everybody the foot gun and go, I hope you still have your toes tomorrow.
And that's we were talking about it just on some side chats as well, and it's kind of if you're going to do cat, which is just concatenating 2 strings, there's no additional risk introduced, or minimal additional risk introduced by shifting a string a bit to the left or a bit to the right? Those really basic operations that are getting added, I think those are, if you're already going to make the leap of okay, we should do cat, then all the rest of the stuff just, that's just makes sense. And I do like the idea too of, another thing that I think nobody has had any necessary objections to, is the great consensus cleanup, but it just hasn't really had a champion for a while. And I really like the idea of this kind of folding in nicely, either under that umbrella or vice versa. I think they're very complementary ideas, where it's there are things with Bitcoin that we know are maybe not broken, but they're not ideal, and we could improve them, and we could, both improve the functionality, but also improve the safety of the protocol, and improve the safety for developers leveraging it. And why don't we just do that? Why don't we just, instead of just everybody dealing with these aspects of the protocol that we know are kludgy and not great and can cause harm, or they are risks, why don't we just clean things up and just fix it, and make the protocol better for everybody, and improve its chances of lasting the test of time like we want it to.
All right, I guess, just a final question, where do you see this potentially losing steam, or just devolving into the same type of bike shedding and politicking? Do you think that is possible versus everybody actually getting behind this?
Yeah, I mean, my dream would be that we have, the various folks pushing for covenants kind of all come together as Avengers assemble, and like get behind the grand vision with like, I'm really happy that Brandon already kind of tightly outlined the scope of like, this is what we're doing, at least on Twitter. It should also be on the mailing list, and then kind of have everybody push forward on implementing this scope together, testing it. I do think that, you know, because the surface area is so big, and again, this is all kind of like a volunteer project, it could very easily get bogged down if people are just subsisting on inspiration, right? And like the high of coming back from a conference, like that's not something that's sustainable, that's gonna last. Like this needs to have, you know, some sort of project management, because it is a big project and it has a lot of moving parts. So like there will need to be some sort of organization continuing to like make progress and progress this. So I think that's one missing piece that, you know, like Bitcoiners eschew roadmaps and plans and all that sort of stuff, but like to do something of this magnitude and to do it in a way where it's not just one person driving it forward, but just kind of been, you know, at least the Taproot soft fork was, if not one person, like a couple people really doing all the work. If this is a broader, more diffuse effort, like it will need a little bit more logistical help, in my opinion, to help it get across. And like I don't think, because this is such a broadly palatable idea that kind of incorporates a lot of the things people wanted to do anyways, I don't necessarily think there's a risk of it like being outcompeted in the marketplace of ideas for a shiny new thing. Like the one that would come to mind would be like a opzkp verify, and I don't really think there's anybody really even close to having an idea for what a good one would be that would be suited for Bitcoin. So like, I don't really think it's going to be outcompeted. I think it would just be, you know, if inspiration dries up, if people don't necessarily do the work, and then, you know, also if ossification drum beats gets too loud. But I do think, I think that even the ossifiers, if presented with, this is something that makes Bitcoin safer. This is not something we just want to do for like bells and whistles. It's like, no, there are issues that we need to clean up. I think that's a better pitch to them who want, you know, Bitcoin to stay the same. But if it's understood that like Bitcoin staying the same is not very safe, and we should remove some risk off the table, I think that that's a better option for them.
All right, well, thanks for sitting down with me, Ryan.
Yeah, it was fun.
I hope everybody enjoyed.